Okay. Hello and welcome to our first Service Design Network meetup in 2018. I'm Katinka Schaaf. I'm a member of the Service Design Network UK chapter committee, and I'm also working here at the Service Design as a service designer at Future Cities Catapult. And today we have three really great speakers who will give us a different perspective on how we can create healthier cities through service design. And we sold out quite early for this event, so some people couldn't come today, and we would like that you share your experience today on our Twitter and through other social medias, of course. So maybe some of you don't know the Service Design Network yet. So in general, the Service Design Network is a volunteer-led organization. It has 22 international chapters and also a community with over 10 years of experience. For us, the UK chapter, it's mostly important that we connect passionate service designers on other designers from different backgrounds, and we also want to create more awareness of what service design is. So we hope we do this today. And who are we? This is the UK chapter, and I hope everyone who's here maybe have a little wave, and mainly in the back. Thank you so much for helping out for creating this event today as well. Just very quickly, maybe hands up who's already a Service Design Network member. Okay, there's some, yeah. And if you are not already a member, there are a lot of great benefits. Personally, I really like to have access to the Touchpoint Journal, but you can also get discounts on events, on conferences, and access to the study library. So you should go to the website and have a look. I'm sure it's also for you. So before we get stuck in the presentations today, we invited the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer, Jarmo Eskelinen. Is a Finnish name, it's not that easy. And
you did well.
He will give us a quick introduction to FCC and also to the theme of the day, Healthy Cities.
Very good. Hi.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Katinka. That was. I'm not using that actually. One of the better pronunciations of my name. So hi, I'm Jarmo. I'm an architect and a wannabe technologist from Helsinki, Finland. I've been working in the domain of urban innovations for the past 12 years or so. But yes, I bluff my way through tech. Have an urban planner background. And where you are now, has anyone been here before? Well, quite a few hands, so we network well, obviously, but not everybody. So this is the hub, the home base of the Future Cities Catapult, which is the UK's urban innovation centre, part of the larger Catapult network, and our job is to try to boost the UK advanced urban services, urban innovator sector to be the best in the world, because that's of course the initiative when the government is giving us funding. So we work across the globe and our numerous UK cities with an interesting team of people here. So we have people from our service designers and insights skills to economists, to coders, filmmakers, and of course lots of project managers. So we can manage all kinds of technology and not technology-driven initiatives in-house. But I think the main question maybe for topic of the day is why should you have a place for urban innovation? What's the point of working with cities and using multidisciplinary teams for that? I've been quite involved following the sort of so-called smart cities movement. We kind of rise and destruction of the smart cities movement, if that could be said, during the past 10 years. I'm not sure if anybody followed that, but basically big companies put lots of money in developing technology-driven solutions to which sort of approach cities as kind of systems which can be all solved through technology and completely integrated. It never happened. And yet we need to do something about the way we run our cities. And the main question, I think, for us is like, why did the technology-driven approach never happen, and what would work then? And I think the starting point to understand is that cities, maybe they are systems of systems, but even more, they are kind of plans over unfinished plans. I mean, one thing we know about London of tomorrow is that it will be different from London of today. And nobody ever can finalize a city. So that's the main difference between a house and a city. I mean, you can basically finish a house, but you can't finish a city. It's in a constant state of flux. So it's much more like an organism than any machine. And the machine analogy was kind of the failure of the smart city thinking. Because these places are not machines. These are organisms, and they consist of people. We are the city who live in it. We make the city. A city without people is a pretty miserable place. Those exist, but, well. Then recently the urbanism has changed, and the way we use cities have changed. We all have the user interface to the city in our pockets. Some of you are taking pictures of me using those at the moment, and also those interfaces are changing. And the reason we need sort of added boost to urban innovation is that cities are having a tough time to manage that change, because digitalization is all about speed. And the main modus operandi for digitalization is to use fast experimentation, fail fast, testing things out, trying things out as the method of development. And that's very alien for cities. It's not the way cities are used to do things. So what we do need is people who can assist cities in managing that, who can assist companies in working with the cities and to make that happen, and kind of go from the thinking that city is the one to deliver you services to thinking where city is the one which enables services to happen in the city. And they can be delivered by different stakeholders, and we could be in a scenario where Uber wouldn't be a kind of a violent disruption for transport of London, but would be anticipated and welcome partner which works with the city to sort out the urban issues. But we are not there now, and that's a task for which we need people who can connect people with people, and that's basically you lot. So I think that probably I have been given 1 minute sign for 3 times now, which probably means that I went over the 3 minutes. So how do we go from thinking that good services, public services or any city services are the same services for everybody, to thinking that good services are just the right services for everybody, and they might be fundamentally different for different people. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Emma. Okay. Can you hear me again? Thank you so much, Jarmo. I also want to say thank you from the Thurston network that you made it possible that we can have the event here today, and that's we're really happy about that. Thank you. So our first speaker is Tim. He's a senior service designer at Good Things Foundation, and he will talk today about how he works closely with NHS Digital together, and together they work on better design, on better ways for people to engage with the health and working towards healthier, more resilient communities. And thank you so much for coming here today, and welcome, Tim. And before I move over, we handed out some of these great postcards today to gather some feedback for each of the speakers. So I asked you very friendly to fill them out, and we will provide them for the speakers afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Katinka asked me to answer a couple of questions, and the first one was kind of what does a healthy city look like to me, and that's my kind of answer. I kind of wanted to say I'll tell you when I see one. But that's obviously not that helpful. But this is a question that we're actually working on quite a lot with NHS Digital, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail shortly. But I also thought I'd have a stab at this, and I thought this is something that I'd be interested to get feedback on. both tonight and also something that I might stick up on the wall when I get back to the office and get some feedback on. So this is my description. It's a little bit long, a little bit wordy, but obviously through refinement we can get that down. So my understanding of what I think a healthy city looks like is a place where everyone is aware of, has access to, and is supported to understand the benefits of the services available to them. And these are services that are seamlessly joined up and support all aspects of health, both physical and mental, both ill health and good health, and both formal and informal. That's it. Trademarked. Done. But yeah, there's a lot. It's a very complex kind of subject to talk about. And a lot of what's in the words in there are kind of what I'll come into as well in a few minutes, as some of the lessons we've been learning through the project that I'm working on. And the second question was, how can your role as a service designer make a city healthier? And again, another really tricky question, but for me, I kind of deconstructed that and thought, okay, so what is it that these two things have in common? And then I was starting to think about what do we do as service designers. So as service designers, we spend a lot of time understanding complexity, understanding context, and designing services. And to me, it struck me that both health and cities, these are kind of the things that they have in common. So both health is very complex, okay? Cities are extremely complex, as we were just hearing there. Health works in different contexts for people at the right time, in the right place when they need it. Same with cities. Cities do the same. It's about the people, as we were just hearing as well. So cities work for the people when they need it in the right place in the right time. And they're based off services, and these are the things that we're kind of paid to design and think about quite a bit. But more importantly, it's the people. So cities wouldn't be there without people. Well, they would, and they'd be pretty miserable, as we've just heard again. And health is not, or health services aren't there or needed without the people. So as service designers, I think the work that we constantly do puts us in a really good position to be thinking about this question and exploring how we can make cities much more healthy for people to live in. And just through the process that we go through, we facilitate conversations, we join the dots between existing services and existing people, we prototype, we test, we learn, all that sort of stuff can really help us to answer that question and kind of understand where we're at. So what I'm going to talk about now is just my experiences of the Widening Digital Participation Project. So I'm from an organisation called Good Things Foundation. Anyone heard of Good Things Foundation? Few. Used to be called Tinder Foundation until about 18 months ago. Changed for obvious reasons. So interesting conversations at conferences with that business card. But yeah, the NHS Digital specifically, which are part of NHS England, have contracted us to carry out a piece of work to understand about how we can embed digital inclusion. So this is our brief actually. How can we embed digital inclusion in healthcare to reach the furthest first? That's the big question for the project. We're a digital inclusion charity, kind of fits. We've got a lot of experience in working around healthcare, fits, and to reach the furthest first, which is quite a difficult thing sometimes to kind of quantify what that means. And this project, and something I'll talk about in a minute, is really kind of helping us get there. But we work with, we've got a network of community organisations around the country who work with some of the most isolated, vulnerable and excluded people in society. So it kind of fit really well. So our response to this was, well, we'll do 20 what we call Pathfinders over 3 years, and we'll kind of work this out together. Okay, so that's the kind of approach we're taking. And a typical Pathfinder at the moment is looking something like this. They're all kind of different. They're 20 different projects, so it's a really good opportunity for us to, as we go, is to kind of refine as we go the process, understand and prototype it and test and learn and everything that we all kind of know we should be doing. So kind of doing a lot of the understanding at the beginning, getting quite quickly to defining a model for us to test and try out, going into an alpha phase, evaluating, reviewing. And the big question at the end, and what we're all in it to do, is to try and understand whether these kind of initiatives and these Pathfinders can actually scale. And if they can, what part of it is it that scales? which is an incredibly interesting and fascinating question that we're looking at. So I'm going to talk about a couple of examples, then look at what we're learning from this process. So first one, a place called Nailsea. Anyone know Nailsea? Cool. Oh, nice. A couple of hands in the audience. I was in Edinburgh talking a very different thing, and I mentioned Nailsea, and I had an incredible kind of response. There were quite a few people that knew it. So Nailsea applied to be one of our Pathfinders. So the town council there bought 65 High Street, this little building here. It's been there for a long time, and looks like this now. So they've bought this. It used to be the butcher shop in the town centre, and they wanted to know whether a physical space could be used to benefit people in the town around digital and health. Perfect. Completely kind of open question, blank canvas for us to go out. That was literally the brief we had. What can we do? So we went down and we spoke to quite a few people there that are kind of close to the town, and then decided the first thing for us to do is to actually open it up as a shop. So we did a 2-day pop-up shop down there, took a load of chalk pens for the windows, got really excited about that and love writing on windows now. Our office is just windows written all over now. So we opened that for 2 days as a kind of an open pop-up shop consultation, had some loads of kind of materials with us, pens, paper, post-it notes, all that sort of stuff, just to be really flexible, and just invited anyone that was walking past into the shop to ask them what they needed in terms of health and digital, and kind of understood kind of what they were doing. So we did a lot of this, talking to this guy, Frank. What a guy. He lives in Glastonbury, gets up every morning, gets on the first bus that comes to his bus stop, goes wherever it takes him, spends the day there, turns around, goes back. And that day, luckily, turned up in Nailsea, came, sat at a coffee, got himself a free pen. We showed him how to find out the bus times on an iPad, and he went back, and he comes back now. Incredible guy. And that's the kind of thing that we're thinking. This guy is really isolated and lonely. Has actually taken the first step that a lot of people don't do, which is, I'm just going to get out there, go and find people. And we've actually been able to kind of provide him with a bit of a place to go, purpose, and he's learning all sorts of things. He's been Skyping his best friend that he hasn't seen in kind of 20, 30 years. So, yeah, some really good things. And when we're talking about health, we're not just talking about, as I mentioned earlier, kind of ill health. This is about kind of what we call well-being and things like that. People connecting, people being able to learn new things and things like that is all really good for our health, and something that our city should be encouraging and supporting and providing to people. And that's what it looks like now. So it opened, not like this, it opened looking like that and that still in October, and they've kind of refined the process over the last few months, and they've now got this, and they've had the targets they were set as a Pathfinder, they've already hit. Been incredible. They've gone through all of them. They've got, I think, 20 volunteers in the town that are now regularly turning up, providing support, digital support to people that come in. They're connected with the local GPs, the hospitals, and they've got people. There's one guy I think that's been in 27 times at last count. Who's just going and just it's a place to go. It's people to talk to. He's learning loads of stuff on the computer, just down to even like just playing games and things like that. But this space on a high street has actually opened up a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities for a lot of people in that town that weren't healthy because they were isolated. They were stuck behind a closed door. They weren't talking to people every day. They weren't able to go out and live their lives the way that we all should be able to. The second example, Hastings. Any Hastings fans? Ooh, a couple in there. I'm a Hastings fan. My nan lived in Hastings. So kind of one of my summer holidays every year was Hastings. So it's interesting to go back there. And on a kind of really different scale. So they're looking at, we're working with a place called Seaview Centre, who are a homeless support centre. And they're supporting rough sleepers and insecurely housed members of the kind of community there. And their idea was, how can digital technology help to connect homeless people with health services, because they don't go anywhere near it. It's frightening for them to go anywhere near a service that's as official as something like health, because they will be asked to put their name on a form, and that could go anywhere, that could go into any sort of system, and someone will come and drag them off the street and do some sort of enforcement, whether it's into some housing that's really not suitable for them, or prison, or a mental institute, or things like this. It's really kind of scary, really interesting stuff. So we're working with them to provide, they're using the funding to get some computer equipment, digital equipment into their day centre. Obvious kind of approach, and it's working really well. They've got some volunteers doing some consultancy with the kind of service users there. But the really interesting stuff is their outreach team. So these are some photos that we took when we were out at 4 o'clock in the morning in Hastings, going out and finding all of the homeless rough sleepers that the centre were aware of around Hastings, to go and ultimately count them, because they need to know where they are and make sure they're safe, the people that they're aware of. And offer them a cup of hot coffee, tea, make sure they're all right, make sure they were aware what's going on in the centre for the next day or for the next week, so they can keep engaging them and keep giving them a reason to come back. And rough sleeping is incredibly diverse. So this was someone really bad, but there's someone stood there. This is in a bus shelter on the seafront, kind of what I was expecting when I was thinking about rough sleepers. This guy's got everything. He's got a pool. He's got a swimming pool, and he's been living in this. So he was in this in a hotel and being put up on some sort, I think it was a youth development service that were putting him up in this hotel. And he fell out with the landlord of the hotel, had nowhere else to go, basically got kicked out. This is the woods at the other side of the fence behind the hotel, and he's just set himself up. He's got this whole system going. But he's vulnerable, he's really insecure, he won't go anywhere near help. And this was a really scary experience. This is on the cliff top in Hastings. There's 2 guys in these bushes that live in there, couldn't find them. We knew they were in there, but we couldn't find them, couldn't count them, couldn't register that with the council, and the numbers kind of get distorted, all that's kind of issues there. And what they're doing is they're going out with digital devices. So they've got phones in the early hours, and they're going out later in the day with iPads, and they're spending time with these service users to make sure they're feeling all right. If there's anything that they're worried about, giving them, taking photos, going back to the St John's ambulance people back at the centre to kind of do a bit of triage, and then they can go out later in the day if they need to and go and kind of give them a bit of extra support. And what they find in this, just one of the case studies that we've got that came through last week, was there was a guy that had been taking tablets for a thyroid problem, I think it was, for 15 years. Same prescription, just able to go and get the prescription. Hasn't seen a GP for kind of 8 years, I think it was. They had a consultation with him, sat down with him in front of the computer, went on NHS Choices, helped him through that, gave him the skills to be able to do that himself. Realised that he'd been taking his tablets, supposed to be taking them in the morning before breakfast. He'd been taking them at tea time after he'd been drinking and eating all day. Basically just stops the tablets from working. So just by that one intervention, actually using digital as a way to kind of engage them has allowed him to actually really change his life, basically, because he's now kind of becoming a lot less, like, not pain-free, but he's kind of being able to manage that and kind of do that. So really interesting stuff. So how long have I got left? So 5 minutes left. Perfect. So what we're learning. So this is kind of what we're all in it for, right? So just a few kind of snippets that I'll talk through here in the last 5 minutes. So this is something I'm really passionate about in terms of service design. I'm sure a lot of you will kind of recognise this and do this and be passionate about it as well. But go to where the people are. I've spent a lot of time myself, and I see a lot of kind of service design done where they try and get everyone in a room and they try and run workshops, and it's very false, the environment that you're bringing people into. You can understand a lot through doing that and you get a lot of insight, but people in those environments, no matter how relaxed you try and make it and how much you say, don't worry, you can say anything in these rooms, they'll come with an expectation that they need to tell you what they think you want to hear. Really interesting kind of dynamic when you really think about it. Go out and see them. Go and see where they spend their time. Go and smell it. Go and have a look at their body language. You hear their tone of voice. You hear how they're interacting with people. Really, really interesting. People who need health services most are not in GP services. They're not kind of in gyms. They're not buying their food from health stores. They're not cycling to work. These are the people that they don't need help. They're already engaging. They're already there. The people that we need to be supporting in our cities are the people that are walking down the high street that might not have spoken to people for 2 weeks, sort of thing. They're rough sleepers. They're sofa surfing. They're in our community centres around the country. They're at job clubs. They're in independent living schemes. They're on traveller sites. These are all things that we're finding out through this project, that these isolated people that are just so far away from health services and the care that they need. Brings me on to this one. focus on relationships. So through doing that and going where people are, we're actually finding that it's the relationships and not the transactions that are making the difference. So people will engage with things because of the relationships. We can design services based on the touch points and the emotions and all that stuff that we do, but actually what we're finding is the key to actually unlocking anyone's willingness to engage with health and with any service really are the relationships they've got. It could be the relationship they've got with their GP that they've seen for the last 20 years and will flat out refuse to go and see any other GP or nurse. It can be their care, it can be the service itself that they might have had a bad experience with that they just won't engage with. Friends, family, colleagues, their neighbours. Without these relationships, that's when people are isolated and excluded and unwilling to engage, and they're the people that we need to be kind of reaching out and finding and including, and kind of our cities need to accommodate these people far more, and we need to all be very much more aware and understand the challenges that they've got. Trust, big thing. Little credit to my colleague Pete Nuckley. Told me to mention that he's a contemporary poet on the side. And he came up with this diagram the other day when he was trying to explain it. So about trust. So this guy, this is GP and a patient coming in. GP recommends an app for them to use through Digital Inclusion Programme. This is great, it's trusted, it's on the NHS apps library. Go and use this. He goes away, speaks to his mate. They're in the wrong order, sorry. Goes away and speaks to his mate who says, oh, you don't want to try this, use this one, this worked. He's like, yeah, I'm going to trust this guy because he knows what I'm going through. Goes back to his GP, I'm using this app because it's real and it's really helping me. The GP doesn't trust that because it's not on the apps library. There's all these very different ways that people can build trust and how that works, and it's really interesting dynamic. Very quickly, use the right language, something that's coming up a lot in healthcare. Health, a lot of people associate that with ill health, and we know that it's not all about that. Staying healthy seems like a good alternative. Can be quite patronising depending on the context, as we were talking about earlier. Well-being, another one, is kind of something that seems to be, through the work that we're doing and the experience we're having, well-being seems to be something associated with mental health. Again, something that a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about, and it's kind of breaking those down and using the right language to make sure that you can engage people and they're willing to kind of engage with that and be supported. This one, so understanding the barriers of awareness and understanding. Awareness is usually the barrier that a lot of people see when they're trying to engage in services. It's the first one, 1 minute left. That's fine, that's the first hurdle to get over. And a lot of people think that that just skips straight to people being engaged, but actually this understanding one, especially in health, really good bit of insight that we found is people will only engage in managing their health better once they understand it. They can be aware that they're ill, but that still won't kind of motivate them to do anything about it themselves. It's the understanding that we need to support people with in terms of the understanding of the benefits and the risks of taking medication, of not taking medication, of exercise and not medication. That's the key to people going, okay, I get it, I now can take ownership of this and build on that. And finally, make it inclusive. I toyed with using accessible as a word. A lot of research that we're doing and what we're finding around accessibility is seen, especially from the people that are kind of most vulnerable and need accessibility to be part of the design, is that accessibility is usually just bolted on at the end. It's usually an afterthought. What we need to do is make sure that we're thinking about this from the very beginning. Designing for the furthest first at the start will mean that it will work for the rest of the people, and you can add layers to that as and when you need to, in the context at which people need to. But if we're thinking back, strip it right back to those people, the most vulnerable, the most in need, then we can actually make it work for everyone. That's it. Am I on? Yes. Cool. Thank you very much. Just honestly, loads of questions. If you've got any, grab me and we'll have a bit of a session. So, cool. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. It was great. And we now have... Oh, no. I think there's a background missing. But that is Amy Ricketts. And thank you very much for coming today, Amy. Amy will speak about patient empowerment and how that leads to a healthier cities and also healthier citizens today.
Thank you. Am I okay? Plugged in?
You're plugged in.
Everything. Okay, great. Thank you for having me this evening to speak. And yeah, as Katinka said, I'll be talking about how I think service design relates to creating healthier cities and using a specific example around some work we're doing at the moment, looking at redesigning the experience for older people leaving hospital. So I'm a service designer at FutureGov, been there for a couple of years, and my background is really in kind of working for the public and third sector, really passionate about using design to improve social outcomes and improve public services. And FutureGov, for those of you who aren't aware, we work with local authorities. We are the, trying to get this right, design and digital company for public services. So we work with local authorities up and down the country and a bit with central government to redesign public services so they're fit for the digital age. And all that means is that they look and feel a bit more like they're created at a time when the internet exists, because they really don't at the moment. And we've just turned 10, which is really exciting as well, so hence the kind of fireworks background there. So we work with a whole range of public services and specifically within local authorities. So we've worked on projects around transport. So at the moment we're redesigning a responsive transport service in rural Essex and Suffolk to help people, isolated people, get around. We do lots and lots of work in social care, which I'll talk about today, spanning through to kind of children's services and beyond as well. And just briefly a little bit more about our approach. So we take 3 different disciplines as part of our approach to doing this work. So design in terms of kind of understanding the user needs, designing services, technology, applying it in the right context, knowing when it's not appropriate and when it is and when it can add value, and change as well. So really understanding all of the kind of incentives, motivations, governance, skills in order to create change within these organisations we're working within. And that means we sort of go between these different levels all the time. So although we do design services, we also build products because that enables some of the services to be delivered, and we also look at the organisations as well that are delivering them, so doing some of that kind of cultural and organisational change that underpins that. And although we absolutely have to do that organisational change piece to transform services, that's not always where we need to start, and that's a bit about what I want to talk about today. So I'm probably going to say very similar things to Tim, but so my definition of healthy cities is about healthy citizens, and I suppose my lens coming from this world is thinking about local government and public services' role in that, in terms of actually they need to support lots of people to do this. And service design, as we know, means with starting with user needs. So yeah, I think that kind of hopefully frames a little bit about what I want to talk about today. So I'll start by talking about the case study and kind of come back around to that at the end. So we were commissioned recently to do a piece of discovery research into looking at the experience for older people leaving hospital. For those of you who have maybe had relatives go through this experience, it's not good at the moment. It's pretty broken. It's quite hard. It's quite hard work. It's where the NHS meets social care, and there's lots and lots of issues. So we did some work in a hospital recently, kind of unpicking what that's like for people going through that experience, patients, but also families as well. So I think, well, you may be wondering what the local authority's role in all of that is, because leaving hospital, that's an NHS service, but the local authority comes in when someone has a support need. So there is a whole world of the NHS in terms of their clinical treatment, the recovery of people, transporting people to get home again, administering people with medication and drugs to take home, and ongoing clinical care. But if you kind of have a presenting support needs, so you might need help with washing, cleaning the house, getting food, addressing kind of social isolation needs, that's when social care comes in. So there's a social care team that sits within hospitals that are there on hand to provide, I guess, signposting and care packages for people. And this is kind of what's driving some of the issues, because you have to navigate between these two really, really complex, huge organisations and systems as a user. So to paint a picture of what it's like to leave hospital and all of the things that need to happen to be aligned in order for you to get out of the door safely. So as a patient, once you've visited the hospital, you've been triaged and admitted and had your treatment and recovery, there's a point at which the clinician at hand will decide whether you're medically fit to leave, and that's totally at their discretion. It can kind of happen at a drop of a hat. So often we'll observe patients sort of sitting in their beds or in chairs, just waiting and waiting to hear that they're ready to go home. Families are waiting, and there's no real update on that, and it might be that they just have a meeting that morning, and suddenly the clinician decides they're fine, they can go home, and it's kind of suddenly all systems go, and then this whole machine of different services and bits of the system need to kind of gear up to get you out of the door. So it's things like transport, I mentioned earlier, medication. They have to arrange for a GP letter to be sent, so a record of what's happened to you while you've been in hospital. They do a bunch of assessments. So as a patient, you sit there in your bed and you get asked kind of the same questions over and over again, maybe with slight differences, because everyone's looking for slightly different information. So mobility assessments, like the strength in your hands, how can you move around the room, can you get to your chair, that kind of thing. And you might have a social care need assessment, so it's really them trying to understand what support looks like at home for you, what your needs might be in order for you to kind of return home safely. And then that might lead to a care package and equipment and adaptations. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to happen in order to get you out of the door safely in a way that is right for you and means that you stay at home and stay independent for longer, because they don't want you coming back into the hospital. And all of this is really, I'm sure you've seen in the headlines, delays are a huge problem to the NHS at the moment. And it's just a case of trying to get people through the hospital, kind of in the door, treat them as quickly as possible and get them out again. And it's not because they don't care and they're not trying, it's just because of the huge demand at the front door and the fact that actually hospitals aren't very good places for people to be. You stand a good chance of picking up an infection, and everyone's just really frustrated and wants to get home generally. So with all of this kind of happening, this is where the delays happen, basically within that kind of big bubble of things. So you might be waiting for all of this to be arranged, and then suddenly something goes wrong, maybe you get an infection and you're kind of back to square one. So wards are constantly sort of battling this kind of influx of people and then trying to get people out of the door. And as a patient, it's really passive, weirdly. So all of that stuff is kind of happening behind the scenes, and you don't really get a sense of that. So you're not really told what's needed to happen to get you home, and you're really not prepared for thinking about what you need to get home and get home safely and what you might need as an ongoing basis. So it's really confusing. Like, there's loads of people that are kind of coming to your bed, asking you lots of questions. You don't feel in control. I think particularly for visiting friends and family who just want to get their loved one out and see them well again, I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes. They just want things to kind of hurry up. And people aren't really part of decision making, or maybe they don't feel heard as well. So it's really hard to challenge medical professionals. And actually, the professionals themselves, because they're dealing with this huge demand at the front door, they don't often want to have conversations with friends and family, because that might add to the delays. That might kind of open up a whole can of worms around, oh, well, they don't want this, so now I have to deal with that problem. And actually, we'll just talk to the patient and we'll try and get them out as quickly as possible. So they don't kind of necessarily invite other people into the conversation and into those decision-making moments. So it's a really passive and quite frustrating experience for patients, but it also has an impact on the system. So as well as the delays, and obviously on the kind of local authorities' mind, is that this drives up quite a lot of demand for social care. So what this means is that because patients and families don't necessarily know how to access support or what support is available, a social worker might come along and do an assessment, and that can feel like the only way of getting support. It's having an assessment, it's having a care package set up for you, when actually there might be lots of things out in the community, out in the market, other places where they can go, but they don't kind of know how to access any of that. It might be the first time they've ever been in hospital, and they have to suddenly navigate this really complicated system. And the other impact is that increases the chances of readmission. So if you're not able to kind of question things and ask what might be set up for me, it increases the chances of you going home with something that's not right for you and doesn't meet your need. So you might well be back in hospital within a day, within a week. And this is kind of the stuff we hear. So people getting sent home with, this is fairly harmless, I suppose, but people being sent home with walking aids when they've got a whole cupboard full of them at home, or being sent home with a care package which doesn't quite meet their needs, but it's kind of what's being offered, so you take it, and that's what the service needs to get you out the door. So it's problematic, I guess, for both sides of the system. So all of that discovery research really led us to this question around how might we empower patients and their support networks to prepare for leaving hospital and play a really central role in that in a way that they're not at the moment at all. So we're really at the early stages of this, and at the moment we're going to be going into the hospital to prototype and test some of these concepts. But it felt like there were 3 really big gaps in the service. I've kind of represented them as digital things for now, as a proxy to say, I think there has to be a human level to this, but I think there's some digital stuff that's missing as well in terms of how we share information and enable people that maybe have relatives living remotely. But there's an opportunity definitely around, I think, as you were saying, around understanding your needs. So people don't necessarily recognise that they might be struggling with something. It might be that they've always lived like that, or their needs have suddenly changed and they're having to kind of cope in these new ways, and they're not quite sure how they're going to cope when they get home. So there's a real gap in terms of helping people understand what they might need, and then communicate it with professionals and services and the market and ask for the right things in the right way. Again, they're having to kind of deal with these acronyms and these different kinds of language, and it's totally bewildering. So there's a real gap around communication and preparing for decision making and preparing for these conversations that they're having to have with professionals on the ward. And then there's a real big gap around understanding what care and support is available. So social care is one world, but there's a whole bunch of other things out there, and we're working at the moment in partnership with a service that helps connect people to the kind of community and voluntary sector as well, around what services are out there in the community. So it's trying to kind of make all of that apparent and helping people basically make that first step in, okay, so I've gone through quite a significant change because I'm in hospital. How do I use this? Instead of as a point to kind of, it's not a point of decline, it's a point of turnaround almost. You can start to understand the system and get better. So we are, yes, as I said, we are kind of going into a hospital at the moment in Essex to try this out and work with this team and work with the wards and figure out actually to what extent some of this is right outside of the hospital as well, because I think this is a fairly universal need. It might be that you go through some form of change when you're living out in the community. You may not have gone to hospital yet. So I think this could potentially have application outside of the hospital, and that's kind of where we're trying to test at the moment. When is the right point to introduce a service that helps you think through this stuff? Are you just going through too much in a hospital environment and you need to do it when you're back home? Is it before? There's lots of variables basically in this system, and it's quite complex, but hopefully that sort of gives you a little bit of an insight into where we are in the project. I've probably rattled through this too quickly. Just to wrap up, that earlier statement around kind of healthier cities and healthier citizens, I think in terms of this project in particular, this is about really making sure that the citizens are informed and empowered and understand what their choices and what they're going through. On this project, it's been really tempting to get stuck into like fixing some of the NHS stuff around how information's shared, how services are coordinated. And all of the kind of innovations and solutions we've seen in this space tend to be around efficiency and helping teams communicate better and gather data. And nothing's really patient-facing. And I absolutely know that you can't just design stuff for patients and expect a whole system to change. But I think it's really interesting if we start there, because that's where a lot of the energy is. It's around the patients and the families that they want to get out of hospital. So why can't we give them the things that they need in order to start doing that for themselves? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. That's really interesting, and I hope we discuss some more about this in a bit. So now we have our next speaker is Paul Thurston, and he will talk about the opportunity for businesses to develop solutions for cities' health challenges. Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to Amy and Tim as well. I was really enjoying that, and then realised I've got to get up and speak. And FutureGov's slides always look beautiful as well, as do yours, Tim, as well. So I'm going to ask you to sort of take a little bit of a step back from thinking about individual services and start thinking about the other side of this, the city element to this. The thing that we see a lot of, and what Jarmo described earlier, is around the marketplace for solutions to some of the problems that cities face. And to be honest, it's fragmented. It's not an easy marketplace to operate in. There's a lot of barriers to come up against. So if you're developing a product or a service for a client, the barriers that they will hit will be significant. And they're not about how good the usability is. They're not about how beautiful your interface is or what have you. They're around things like supply and demand not being aligned. There's issues with scaling as well at city scale. Current regulations, for example, or lack of current regulations mean that companies don't necessarily invest at the scale we need. And antiquated city procurement systems, which don't allow for more innovative procurement. And I think by this, I mean things that you see out in the street. To get stuff out in the street is really, really hard. So if you've got a great idea for a way you can gamify a product which would have significant health benefits, it's very, very hard to get cities to buy that. It's even harder to scale it up to a city level. And so our job is to start to unlock some of that. So that's what I'm going to focus your attentions on for the next 15, 20 minutes. But first, I like a quiz. Who likes a quiz? Yeah, some nods. Okay, so instead of coming up with my definition of what a healthy city is, I thought I'd put that back on you. So I'd like to shout out, who knows what the healthiest city is in the UK? Does anyone got an idea? Croydon. Good guess. Brighton. Sheffield. Okay, so there's no answer to this. It's a trick question. And because there are lots and lots of studies into what makes a healthy city, all of which use different data points and all of which are done by different organisations which have different vested interests. Now, Bristol is the closest we can get to a winner because that appears top in a number of different studies. So I've taken that as the winner. So if you said Bristol, well done. But it is a trick question. Globally, what do you think is the healthiest city globally? Trick question. Any ideas? There is actually a good answer for this one. Helsinki. Swedish. Stockholm, Copenhagen. Generally, Copenhagen is the answer. So if you go with the Economist's livability score, which is an annual study of the livability of cities, Melbourne tops that list and has done for the last 7 years. So in terms of a good quality study of global health in cities, that's a really good indicator. But again, there's no real answer. Third question, I'd like you to think about 3 measures that you think are used to determine how healthy a city is. Happiness, air quality, employment. Any at the back there, over this side? Sunshine. Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, absolutely, all of those are on there. Things like gross national income, livability, air quality, cultural stimulus, number of green spaces, number of doctors per head, all of these things make up a healthy city. And we'll have a different view about what's more important. Is it more important to have more doctors per head or lots of green spaces or great mobility or great cycling, but very, very poor air quality? Like, what's the kind of balance here? And the answer is there's no definitive answer. So thank you for participating in that slight little trick. What I'm going to talk to you about today, though, is something called the Advanced Urban Services sector. It's something I'm very passionate about and what we focus on here. And I think you're going to start to hear a lot more about this term. And I'm going to talk specifically about kind of our role as service designers working with companies within this sector at city scale. So hopefully some of the work we've been doing here at the Catapult will share some of those thoughts with you about those projects and how that might benefit you in your practice, within your companies, within your organisations. So this is my beautiful team, fantastic people, all of them. We're actually a lot bigger than this, but we didn't have time and the ability to coordinate to get a proper team photo that was up to date. So there are more people in this team, and there's quite a lot of them around the room as well. My name's Paul, so I'm the head of the insight and design team here, and we do some really interesting projects, and we go from insights to design, as the title would indicate. But around that, there are a number of different teams which we coordinate and cooperate with, such as data science, economists, technologists. And so the ability to work with a company or an organisation from a concept or an idea about something that would have an impact on people's health, to take that right through to deployment within a city and actually test whether that works, and then working with our economists to then think about how you take that to scale. So this morning there was a really exciting project. When I say exciting, it excites some people, Aisling, who sat at the back there in particular, but essentially it's looking at all of the barriers that projects that are looking to be deployed in cities fail on. So things like access to assets, like if you want to do a project around smart street lighting, it's really hard to get access to smart street lights because the way the contracts and the procurement works. So we're currently working on a project that's unlocking that. So that means if we come up with amazing solutions, or we work with companies to come up with amazing solutions, actually we can talk about deploying them at city scale. We've obviously packaged up kind of what we do within the urban sector, and we've got a kind of a manual which helps us communicate that with the rest of the business. But as a service designer working in cities, it's really quite hard because you're not designing an end-to-end service. And actually designing really beautiful services that work really well counts for a lot less within a really highly and heavily regulated environment. So as service designers, I think we need to think beyond end-to-end services. And I think especially when we start to consider health, I think, Tim, you had in the three kind of key things that we as service designers are good at. Dealing with complexity, absolutely. The cities are incredibly complex. And I think when you think about it from other perspectives outside of health, it's a little bit simpler. So considering transport, for example, there is a finite number of ways that you can get around a city, and there's different journeys you can make. And yes, that's complicated, but it's very regulated. But you can define how people are going to move, and it's about making that system of mobility really efficient. With health, you're throwing in thousands of other potential conditions and environments there, which does make it a lot harder to deal with. But as service designers, we're working in cities, and I think the problem there is that nobody really owns that end-to-end experience. So you can't go to one person and get an answer to whether your project signs off unless you're dealing with the mayor. But even then, you have to get buy-in from hundreds of other people. So thinking about how you actually go about that is really, really important. And I think actually it's not really about kind of owning an end-to-end user experience. It's about kind of system dynamics and kind of we use the term what you dial up or dial down a lot here. And that's a really good way to consider working in cities. You're not going to fix everything. And when I talk about system dynamics, is a really, really good example of how you can have a play around with this. I don't know if anyone managed to have a go whilst they were upstairs or went to the Big Bang Data exhibition at Somerset House. We developed this London data tool. And essentially, this is what we're looking to do. Like if you dial up housing in one area or you develop new services for people with a very specific need here, there is an impact in a city elsewhere. And what is that potential impact? That's the challenge that city planners are facing. And that's what we need to be able to be better at, understanding how our services fit within that. So why does this matter to us? Well, I think there's kind of three key reasons why this matters to us. Firstly, there's a commercial opportunity here. Solving problems around health in cities is a global market opportunity that we should all be interested in. The UK is great at service design, it's great at planning, it's great at government services. It's got some really great businesses working in cities around the world. We should be capitalising on that. And I think as a service design community, we can offer a lot to that. So when we talk about advanced urban services, these are services that need to be designed. They need to be designed well. You're the guys who should be doing that. I think secondly, I mentioned there about the kind of capabilities that we have in the UK. A lot of the clients that some of you may have or the organisations you work with, I'd be interested to hear how many of you from agencies have a construction company as a client. Okay. So these are the types of businesses which would massively benefit from our skill sets when they start to reconsider, well, actually, as a construction business, we're building cities around the world. What is it that cities are going to need? Well, once that building's built, there's a huge amount of opportunity. The other thing on that is the introduction of digital transformation within construction. BIM is a term that you may have come across. There's a huge opportunity there for the UK, and that's something that us as a service design community should be more engaged with. And I think finally, is sort of why does this matter to us? Well, I think we want to have more impact. we want to work at a scale where we can really change how cities behave. And whilst looking at individual services is really, really important, in order to have the level of impact that we would like, we need to think about how we interact with cities and at city scale. But the push for healthy cities isn't new. Someone said Brighton earlier. I found this lovely vintage poster. So healthy cities, going away to different cities for health or various different reasons, has always been kind of an interesting marketing tool, particularly with kind of tourism industry. But also the idea that you're kind of moving from one place to another for health reasons is really good. You think about kind of how buildings in inner cities across the UK were knocked down in the Victorian era to clear the way for new development. Well, in the same way that in the 70s people moved out of cities and into the suburbs, we all want happier, healthier lives, and cities should support that. But over the years, it's proven that that's not always the case. Does anyone, any idea where this is? Any guesses? It's quite a hard one, unless you look at up here, as it was pointed out to me. So this is Schengen, which is a city in China. This city, since 1985, has had a 6,000% increase in population. It's a phenomenal place. I've been lucky enough to go a couple of times, and you've probably got hundreds of products that have been manufactured here. I found out a really interesting stat the other day. I mean, you may know it already, but basically in 3 years between 2011 and 2013, China used more concrete than the US did in the whole 20th century. So if you think about the pace that this is happening at, it's absolutely unprecedented. This is not something that the world has seen before. And whatever you think of that, there is some opportunity there for us to shape how that works. So we think that we should have a role to play in making sure these cities are built from user needs and they start to address these problems. But that won't necessarily happen unless we take a role in that. So I mentioned there about kind of a commercial opportunity. I think sort of to try and differentiate between the speakers today, I'm looking at this purely from if you're developing healthy solutions for cities, this is an opportunity. And I think for larger cities with kind of scale, capacity, and also an appetite for reform, these types of new technologies and services are actually being adopted at a pretty fast rate. And those cities that are being developed and built right now, again, they're being developed at the right rate. But going back to my quiz earlier and the kind of measures of what makes happiness and things like that, there are a number of cities around the world which are very new builds, and they have a very poor quality of life. They have very poor cultural interaction. They have very poor air quality, for example. And these are new cities. Like, they should have been built better than this. And they're now suffering, or people that live there are suffering because of that. So when we're talking about the advanced urban services sector, it was interesting just to find out kind of the construction industry as kind of one sector of that. Health tech is also another. And this is how we're defining the area in which we work in here at the Catapult. And I think, like I say, this is something that you probably do have clients working in this area, and you do work, some of the organisations that you're from will be working in this area. For those of you working in IT, you're probably working with companies that sit in here providing services to them as well. So I think having an understanding of the mission that we have here is useful. There are some really cool examples of stuff that's going on as well. So this may not look like a healthy city initiative. It's obviously kind of a nice setting in that. But essentially, this is a construction project to build a new bridge in Amsterdam. This is software provided by Autodesk. ABB provide the robots, the printers, and a company called MX3D are running that project and have developed that concept. So this is a 3D printer. It's going to take about 3 years to actually print. But essentially, this is a piece of R&D which could potentially revolutionise the way in which construction works within cities. So, for example, the amount of traffic of construction trucks going into the city is reduced. The amount of noise pollution is reduced. The amount of waste is reduced. There's all these kind of benefits to health, but this is a construction project. It's not a health initiative. Again, there's projects like a company called Improbable. Has anyone heard of Improbable? They've developed something called a spatial operating system platform, and it's mainly used for the games industry, kind of a proper real-world simulation. It's worth having a really good look at. They're based around the corner, and they got, I think it's $1 billion investment from SoftBank recently. And essentially what they're trying to do is map a real-time map of the city. So as a city planner, you can make very, very accurate decisions about what your intervention would actually do to the population, to traffic, to services in that city. And what you then get is a really, really good picture that you haven't had to put out onto the street and invest huge amounts of money in and things like that. So this kind of digital sim of cities is something we're going to start to see an awful lot more. You've probably seen the kind of sort of the 3D imagery on Google satellite, for Google Earth, for example. But it's actually thinking about how people are interacting and moving through that city in real time. So this is actually of Cambridge here. And again, something you might see on the street are things like the InLink totems, which again are looking at how do you measure air quality. So we're working with them to think about, well, if you've got this infrastructure on the street, how could you actually start to measure air quality on that very, very specific location, and then tell people about that and actually get them to start to potentially change behaviours because they have that information and they're able to see that. So I thought it might be useful just to give you kind of a couple of examples as well of some projects that we've done over the last few months and where this thinking has started to come from. There's a couple of people in the room who worked on this, Belen and Anya from my team. This is essentially looking at how smart traffic lights could affect A&E response times. So if you've got the technology to develop traffic lights which could be responsive to A&E calls, wouldn't that be great? Because actually that would unlock traffic flows and enable them to get to their destination faster. So you can't get more responsive in cities around health from an ambulance needing to get from A to the patient and then back to the location. Again, working with Microsoft and guide dogs for the blind. So thinking about the journeys that people with visual impairment go through and some of the technologies that we could start to introduce that would augment that experience. So things like beacon technology in railway stations, for example, would have a significant impact. And so we've developed a host of prototypes around this, which started to understand kind of what that experience could look like, which has then been taken on by those businesses. And as you walked in, you would have seen Tito, which is our off-grid digital screen. So I keep getting told off for calling it just a screen. It's essentially, the plan is that we will deploy these across the UK, working with cities to essentially install them as a test bed for new devices, for measurement, for understanding very, very specific data around a location. So how people are using that particular environment, how people are interacting with each other. The aim is then to provide that as a service to companies that have technologies that would benefit from that. So again, thinking about the types of things that affect your health on the street, like antisocial behaviour, for example. It's a really, really significant issue around people's mental health if you live in an area where there's significant antisocial behaviour on the street. So understanding how we can use these types of platforms to do that. So Katinka briefed me and said, look, I need some thoughts on what we can do as service designers about this. So I've put together 4 things that I think service design can do to help make cities healthier. First of all, I think we need to be part of the conversation around aligning the supply side with the demand side. So when we start to talk to our clients, we need to be better informed about the challenges that they face in the deployment phase. I think having worked in service design for over 10 years, I think we don't have a huge amount of discussion about what the challenges are when you actually start to launch and deploy things. We're really good at the upfront bit, the conceptualizing, but what we don't do is focus on, well, how do you actually take that out and run that? And that, for me, is what we can start to do working with city authorities who are sitting on the demand side, with ourselves looking at the supply side. A good example of this, I saw earlier in the week, as a news article, some of you may have seen it, was around the amount of procurement that the NHS has done with UK businesses. So 10.9% of NHS contracts are with small businesses. So and small businesses counts as under 250 people with a 50 million turnover. So they're not all tiny little operations. So only 10% of contracts are actually awarded. And there's an even worse amount in terms of the amount of UK companies with innovations that are then able to sell into the NHS. And so unlocking that as a market is a really, really important thing. So if you've got technologies that could benefit people's health, that's really important. I think your comment there about the kind of disconnect between social care and healthcare and the preventative and the responsive is exactly what we're kind of looking at here. Secondly, if you work in a design agency, I think you really need to start designing with regulators in mind. So there's a tendency to think, don't worry about the regulators, we'll just come up with this amazing thing and everyone will want it. And then you get to a situation like Uber's in now. That's a bad situation for a company to be in. It's a great solution, but actually by not engaging with regulators and not working with cities, you come up against it. So what you see outside now, if any of you came through Clerkenwell Green, there's about 3 bike sharing schemes out there now, all competing with each other. But they're regulated and they're working with the cities. So the city is on board with providing some competition within the bike sharing scheme. That's a positive thing for them. So I think about the regulators that affect the products and services that you develop. 1 minute left. Well, that's very good. I'm going to do it slowly now then. Okay, so number 3, service design. We should pay attention to the rise in as-a-service business models. So you may have come across mobility as a service, MaaS as a term. If you haven't, it's worth having a look at. In Helsinki, there's a service called WIM, which is actually a part of the regulated city infrastructure and working with the transport authorities and essentially packaging up different transport options and presenting that as a service. And I think when you're thinking about city scale, you're not going to be able to deliver a taxi service, a train service, a bus service, walking routes. You need to start thinking, how do we package these up and present that as a proposition? Because people want to buy travel. They want to get from A to B. They don't really care whether it's TfL, whether it's Thameslink, or whether it's Southern Rail that are kind of providing it. They just want to get to where they need to go. Another example of that is WeWork as well, which is providing space as a service, which is worth having a look at, a kind of move towards that as a business model. And I think this is something within the health sector. Obviously, the insurance industry has been quite good at doing. I think we need to think about a bit more holistically about how that integrates with our government healthcare services. Finally, I should say number 4, focus on the specific skills and expertise that you as service designers bring to cities. And I think remember that service design alone isn't the answer in cities. You're looking to work and partner with other providers, other skill sets, other organisations, and bringing them together as a partnership is where you can have the impact. I think when we start to think about service design as being, we can solve the problem of healthy cities through our process and our way of working, that's where we're going to fall down. So I think there is a role to play for service design, but I think we need to sort of kind of stop thinking about discrete services and start thinking about multi-channel services, multi-organisation services. So how do we work with a number of organisations to bring them together to create a proposition that has an impact on health within a city? And that's not always looking at individuals and changing behaviours or looking at how you deliver to specific individuals. It might be looking at platforms that can enable these types of things to be successful. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an introduction to the kind of work we do here and the view that we have on cities, but also on service design and how that can be utilised by cities really effectively. And I think looking at the kind of inquiries that we get and the kind of the kind of organisations and the challenges that we get brought. Service design is a really, really powerful process and an approach that has real value, and I think we need to just be better at connecting as a practice to those challenges that cities face. Thank you.